Hey, friends, welcome back to the Christian Music Industry Podcast. I'm your host and your friend in the Christian music industry, Wisdom Moon. And I can't believe it's already almost the end of August. I mean, we've now passed more than half of the year. It almost feels like the end of the year now. So yeah, there's been just a lot going on. Summer's almost over, and I have a friend of mine on the podcast I'm really excited about, Aaron Williams. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, you guys. Thank you, Wisdom. So happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to join the podcast and just share what's happening in your life and what God's doing. And I want to say we met maybe close to like 4 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember. Do you remember how we met?
Oh yeah. Um, I was launching a music project and needed a lot of help, and someone said, "Wisdom Moon is your guy," and pointed me in the right direction. And so we reached out and um, had a great conversation just about what you guys do, and then it's been awesome just to stay connected since then and work on a lot of music together, but kind of develop a friendship along the way as well. So yeah, it has
Yeah.
been a few years though. I think that was pre-pandemic or yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was like the year. Yeah,
Yeah, that those years are kind of all a blur. I feel
they
like.
are. Yes, they
Yeah, I
are.
was just talking to somebody this past Sunday. We had a baptism Sunday at church, and it's my first time at the church when they were doing a baptism because we do it like once a year at this private lake, and it's like a big celebration. And I was asking somebody there that I met. And I asked them, when did they start coming to the church? And they were like, I think 2 years ago. I think three. I don't know. That was like, yeah, that's the pandemic. That's the
Yep,
COVID blur.
yep.
Yeah.
It really is.
And I mean, you've had a lot of other things happening, a lot of changes. You literally
Yeah,
uprooted your family and moved to the beautiful state of Texas. And
yeah.
so, yeah, tell us about that. I mean, that's a big transition, and what
Yeah.
exactly happened and why you guys decided to do that.
Yeah, for sure. It has been a big transition. It's been good, but it's, any like uprooting and moving states is people ask me how it's going and I'm like, I think it went about as smooth as it possibly could have, but it was still like really tiring, I mean, there's no way of getting around
Yeah.
like especially we've got two little kids. We got two boys at 8 and 6. So like,
Oh, yeah.
just all the stuff that the kids have. But it's been really good. Yeah, we I was on staff at a church in Little Rock, Arkansas, Fellowship Bible Church. Had been there for 11 years and, loved it, loved the people, was a wonderful ministry and church to be a part of. And the Lord's started just calling us to slowly. I mean, this happened over probably a year of like prayer and discernment to
Mm,
launch a nonprofit that had been on our heart that started through a conference that we were leading at the church called Dwell. And
yeah.
so, unknowingly, the week before the pandemic began in March of 2020, the church prayed over us, commissioned us out. We launched into Dwell, which had a music component, and it was like a worship and discipleship ministry. And then the next week, everything turned upside down. And so, for the
Mm,
next year to year and a half, we, we just kind of kept following where the Lord was leading as best as we could through the pandemic. And a huge
mhm,
part of that was releasing music that had kind of been, a
yeah.
dream and kind of been, we had some songs in our back pocket, so to speak. And so we released a handful of songs throughout that year. And through that process, got connected with Shane and Shane and the worship initiative here in Dallas through a song that I wrote
Mm,
called Abide. That particular song, they wanted to put on a volume for what they do here,
mm,
release some of the resources for it. And yeah, just through that friendship, I had known of Shane and Shane. They had been part of my soundtrack as a young
oh, yeah.
worship leader for a lot of years, and so
Me
had a high
too.
respect for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a high respect for them and loved kind of getting to hear what they were doing here at the Worship Initiative. And basically, over a series of months, they talked to me about like an expansion part of the Worship Initiative, which we're now living in
Mm,
currently. And a part of that was to be able to come on, an invitation to come onto the team as a songwriter and a resident artist onto the
mm,
record label that was forming, to be able to like help form a team of writers here. So it was kind of an unforeseen second transition in many ways, but it involved a move to Dallas. And um, it's ironic that we're talking about it right now in the sense that it was a year ago this week that we landed. So we've been here
oh
for
wow,
just right at a year. And yeah, it's
crazy.
been great. Uh, yeah, really exciting to be a part of what's happening here.
Wow.
But yeah, like you said, like the move, it tests your faith in a lot of ways, and really, you have to
Mm,
trust where the Lord's leading. And so we've walked, that's been a big part of our story over the last few years, but especially this last year.
yeah. I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard of the Worship Initiative and or Shane and Shane, and they might hear you talk about him. They might be like, "That's my dream job. How did you even, like get that job?" So is that something that you ever like imagined of doing? And was it like a pretty immediate, "Oh yeah, of course I'm going to say yes to this," or was it really a hard decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of my dream job too. I mean, there's, any work is work. So no matter what kind of
Yeah.
work you're doing, it's still work. But oh man, there's so many moments where I'm just like incredibly grateful. It feels like some of the Lord's faithfulness in my life. I started leading worship when I was like in junior high, high school, and
Mm,
always felt like the Lord had kind of spoken over me a particular, maybe calling, if you will, to write songs specific for the church. So like I've had a
mm,
passion to write songs, but specifically trying to resource the church. And so to like pair up with the Shanes and the worship initiative that are just like geared straight toward that. And I already have a platform built to do it has been a dream come
yeah.
true. And honestly, the Shanes are just as wonderful people off the stage as they are on stage. And really the whole team is here as well. So the team that's building I get to write and lead with Davy Flowers and John Mark Cole are
Mm,
artist friends of mine now. They're both amazing. Um, so yeah, it's ministry is an ebb and flow for sure. I've walked through lots of hard seasons, lots of difficult seasons, but there are also, I feel like, these moments that you kind of savor when they happen because you know that it's not going to be forever, and next week could be a
yeah.
hard week, but yeah,
Mm,
we're living in a little bit of a season. I feel like that's just a little bit of a pause in like
yeah.
maybe feeling some of the reward of faith steps that we've taken and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, you alluded to, there being hard seasons as well. And for, I would say, most people with like a public platform, which I would say you have a
Hmm.
public platform, you don't see a lot of people sharing the hard seasons. Usually it's like a highlight reel, like it's a perfect photo of themselves or their family or, in the studio and things like that. So I would love to, just unpack some of that. Like, obviously, we all have hard seasons, but sometimes it's hard to imagine, people that have these platforms, Christian artists, worship artists, having hard
Yeah,
seasons. It just looks like on social media they have a perfect life, right? So, yeah,
totally.
yeah. What are some things that you've had to like walk through some of your hard
Yeah.
seasons?
Um, well, thanks for inviting the vulnerability because I think it's important, to not just show the highlight reel. And um, I would say one of the biggest ongoing battles for me as an artist, but also just as a person, as a leader, is just dealing with seasons that I just feel really lonely. And
Mm,
loneliness is an interesting thing because you can be surrounded by people even
Yeah.
encouraging people, and you can still experience loneliness.
Yeah.
And so when I say that, I don't mean in any way that like I don't have a great family or I don't have a supportive group of friends.
Mm.
I do have that. And I think the loneliness can come depending on personality types. Loneliness can come from just, you know, uh, the seasons where like you feel like you're the only person going through a particular struggle.
Yeah.
And for us, that's been, we're in our mid 30s. And so moving states in your mid 30s has felt like not the normal thing to do, like I see a lot of 20-year-olds moving, but like for a lot of people, you're by your mid 30s, you feel like you're kind of locking down, roots are
Mm.
going deep. And so to be the new people in a place when we're kind of at the age where you would think that we're kind of the established, you
Mm.
know, we're moving into a new neighborhood and there's friend groups that are already established. Our kids are joining new sports teams and, there's already
Yeah.
established people. And so it can be this really odd thing where you can be surrounded by lots of people and you can kind of feel like, man, are we by ourselves?
Mm.
And so I think that's been a part of it. I also think there's something to being an artist, if you will, and um, putting yourself out there. Like I just released a new project, and I feel almost every time I release music, I feel this like uh, this two sides of the same coin. One of them is like I'm excited, I'm pumped about it, can't wait for people to hear it, and then the other side is like I feel a little guarded, a little
Mhm.
vulnerable. Of like, man, I really put myself out there. Like,
Yeah.
what if people don't like it? What if they don't see the beauty in it? And
Yeah.
so that's another moment where um, you can be surrounded by people and feel lonely. But that's one of the reasons I'm super thankful in this season to have other artists that I'm kind of journeying alongside is
Mm.
we've been able to talk about that. And it's actually encouraging to hear another person say, you're not alone. I feel the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And there's something about that, like co-journeying that
Mm.
even if it's someone saying, I don't know that I can solve your feeling of loneliness or being alone at times, but like just the fact that I feel the same thing and
Mm.
we can like pray for one another, share that with one another, that ends up being the very thing that like,
Mm.
helps you along. And for me, it's usually been more intimate friendships like that that's been really helpful
Yeah.
than large groups of people, like just one or two people that I can share stuff with. And so the Lord's been super generous in this season to give me fellow new friends and new people that are in our neighborhood that we're like
Mm.
getting to know that we've been able to go kind of deep with. So that would be one of the things for sure would be like
Yeah.
a sense of loneliness.
Yeah. I think that's something that all of us can really relate to, especially in ministry. You're,
Yep.
pouring out to serve other people, lead people, and then sometimes the loneliness is because you're so exhausted and like you don't even
Yeah.
want to like you don't feel like you have any more to give to even like a
Yep.
friendship. And what
Yeah.
I've seen, and I think it's even like biblical too, or like we see it in the Bible with like Elijah, where when you feel lonely or isolated, you start to lose courage and start to like
Yep.
have
Hmm.
fears, creep in, and then you're kind of like walking outside of God's purpose for your life, and not
Yep.
really like living out your full life. So yeah, I think loneliness is really a topic that more Christians should be talking about, and discussing and like being really vulnerable about, and especially um, the ones that have influence, and like have a platform. So yeah, thanks for sharing about that because I think it's not really talked about enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, just to add one more thought, I think obviously everyone can deal with different struggles like loneliness in different ways, but if we're not careful, for me the temptation is to kind of like when I feel lonely to like self implode and to
Yeah.
just totally totally go insular and, to be on my phone more and to be looking,
Mm,
almost subconsciously looking for connection, but to be doing it like in a way that's actually not providing actual
yeah.
connection with other people. And so I've had to really, I think, learn over the years that like when I feel that, um, to really like go outward and to
Mm,
pursue friendship, pursue relationship, talk about these things. And then you find out you're like, oh, loneliness is a pretty common human experience.
yeah.
We just don't we just think we're the only ones because we're not talking about it. But if you start talking about it, you're like, oh yeah, they felt that and they're experiencing that because of this thing.
Mm.
And I don't know, it's just a way of finding camaraderie and friendship, I think.
Yeah, I personally can definitely relate too, because actually this month, also for us, 4 years ago, we moved from Nashville back to Kansas City, and
Mhm.
uh, most of our friends that we had before when we were in Kansas City, they all actually like moved out of the state, and so it was kind of like starting over. We started to look for a new home church and all those things, and also starting a new like venture, a new company
Yeah.
feels lonely as well,
Yes.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. And I think too, with that season of like loneliness, and sometimes it could be a very long season, especially if you're not really seeking it out, like you talked about. It's also
Yep.
hard sometimes to really be vulnerable about it to God, even though, like, in our head, we know God knows everything, but sometimes it's like,
Yep.
I don't know if I want to really open up about it, or like if God really cares about it, because it doesn't seem like he cares.
Yep.
So how do you, I guess, even approach God in this like vulnerable, honest posture and honest state?
Yeah. Man, that's a great question. And I think the answer I would give applies to loneliness, but this could also apply to grief.
Mm,
So if you've lost someone and you're wrestling through like pain and disappointment, really any of the difficult aspects of life, could be doubt and depression, things like that as well. I think the beautiful invitation that I see in the scriptures is that the biblical authors, maybe even particularly the psalmists, they just go to God with that stuff,
mm,
Um,
yeah.
they it's like um if God were our best friend and we could just tell him anything and not be afraid of how he was going to respond. Oftentimes I do think we place those limitations on God when they're not really limitations of his, they're
Mm,
limitations of our own. And so I've had to learn through journaling, mostly, or songwriting even, um, that I can tell God what I'm thinking. I can tell him what I'm experiencing,
mm,
and I can even tell him what I think about it. And the
yeah.
psalmist does that. It's like, if you feel like God's left you out to dry, the psalmist is like, how long, O Lord? Like,
Hmm.
are you going to turn your back on me forever? And there's just like this really honest moment. And for me, it's been like, in the moments where I feel like prayers are going unanswered, just to like ask the Lord about it. He's not intimidated by my questions.
Yeah.
I even think there's even like this beautiful way of being honest with the Lord that becomes a pathway to intimacy
Mm,
that I never knew about because I wouldn't talk to my I wouldn't talk to my closest friends even about my pain points in life,
mm,
much less pray them.
yeah.
And the more I began to understand and have people of wisdom in my life, like just really say, like you can you can take those things to the Lord. Like Psalm 62 says, pour out your heart before God because he is a refuge.
Mm,
And I just love that imagery of like whatever's all in there, just like pour it
yeah.
out. Like,
Yeah.
and for me, that's been writing it down or putting into a song and you know, not trying to filter it to make it pretty,
Mm,
but um, if I'm feeling lonely, just say, Lord, I'm feeling lonely. here's why I think I'm feeling that way, or I don't know why I'm feeling that way, can you help me discern? And oftentimes I don't even feel like I get answers to those questions. I just
Mm,
get a nearness of God's presence because I'm bringing my life to him. And when you think about it, it's like that's the real goal anyway. It's not
mm,
necessarily just to get answers to all of our questions, but to like root ourselves in the nearness of God. And so, you know, pain and suffering and loneliness, things like that, actually can become quite clearly a pathway to intimacy with the Lord if we learn to,
mm.
utilize them in that way.
Yeah, that's good. So you said you journal. Is that something like you do every day or?
No, I wish I did. Writing has just always been helpful for me. I'm kind of an internal processor, and so I feel like at times in my life, my mind just gets jumbled with like 1,000 thoughts,
Yeah,
and weighed down. And there's something to me about writing down my thoughts that when it comes out on paper, it usually makes
yeah.
more sense, and I can like discern what it is that I'm actually wrestling with because it's I don't know, there's something tangible about writing it down. So I do journal regularly. I wish it was every day, but it's
Mm,
it's mostly when I'm trying to discern, what's going on
mm,
in my head and heart, and that's been helpful. Songwriting's the same way. If I can figure out how to turn a life experience or something like that into a song,
yeah.
usually in the process of wrestling it down, I get to know myself and my struggles more clearly because you gotta have to articulate them.
Mm, yeah. So I have a question about journaling because I actually used to journal when I was younger, like a ton. And as I got older, I stopped journaling. And I think it's because I'm afraid of other people reading it, if I'm honest.
Hell yeah,
Like
for sure.
I just don't want people reading my honest like thoughts. And I'm an internal processor too. So I like to keep my thoughts private, and
Yeah,
like
oh yeah.
journaling is very vulnerable, very honest. So like how do you handle that, I guess?
I've thought about that before, and there's been a time or two, like even when we moved, when we were packing all of our books in our bookshelf is where I had a bunch of past journals.
Mm,
And one, it is slightly hilarious for me to go back and read some of the
yeah.
things because um some of the things that I just felt like were the biggest deal in the world, and I read through them years later and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like so dramatic and that wasn't near as big of a deal as I felt like it was. um and I've thought before, like, man, if someone got their hands on these, like, it would be so embarrassing. But I guess I don't worry about it too much. I had a specific spot that I would put those types of journals, and my kids would know this is kind of where Dad, you know, gets his thoughts out on paper type thing. And I've just never ran into anyone wanting to exploit that, but it's
Yeah.
totally possible. And maybe one day when I'm gone to heaven, people are gonna, my kids or somebody's gonna be reading my journal, just laughing at me for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I think that's what sometimes like makes people afraid of journaling online because they're like, what if I get hacked and
Yeah,
everybody, sees it in the whole entire
yeah,
world? Whereas at home, I guess you only have to worry about your family peeking in your journal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's for sure. I don't know that I would put it online.
Yeah. I'm like, man, I wonder how David feels about everybody reading his journaling, essentially, like
Yeah,
the
that's
entire
that. You're
world.
right. That is true. Yeah, there was one of the coolest things I did. I don't know if this website still exists, but there used to be a website that you could go to it and you could choose a future date,
Oh,
like a year from now or 3 years from now, and you could write yourself a letter or a note, and it would send it to you whenever you
oh yeah, I've
designated it
seen
would
that.
be.
Yeah,
And that was actually I did that a few times, and that was actually kind of cool because I would go in there and I would write things that were kind of like prayers over my life. This
mm,
is in a year from now or two. I can't remember if I did like a year or 2 years, but like this is what I would hope to be true.
Mm.
And so I just wrote like some bullet points. And I remember I totally forgot about it, blank, put it in the back of my mind. And when it showed up in my inbox, it was actually like a profound moment for me because
Wow.
I was, able to like kind of go, wow, I think some of those things might be coming true. And that thing
Mm.
I was praying for did happen, So I think there's something about journaling, even if it's not like
Yeah.
a website that sends you something in the future. There's something powerful about looking back on our stories. And I think even something biblical about like the idea of remembering being such an important theme of worship, where
Mm.
oftentimes when we get stuck or we feel fearful, I think there's a reason why you all through the Old Testament, just the story of the Exodus is brought up again and again. And they
Yeah.
even put like rhythms in their family life, in their annual
Mm.
calendar to like walk through their story as a people. And I think there's something that can
Mm.
be true about that for us as well. Like we're certainly like ingrained in the story of God and as God's people, but even remembering specific things of like, hey, at this point, maybe for you, like, hey, like I took this huge leap of faith to start this company, move my family back here. Here are the things I've seen God do. And then you get to the next one of those in your life, and to be able to look back and go like, oh
Yeah.
man, like God, he faithfully answered these prayers, and even though that turned out different than I thought it would, like gosh, he was so faithful there.
Mm.
I do think it builds something inside of us,
Yeah.
that like faith rises up inside of us.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good points, and I think there's a lot of different approaches to journaling or like having those reminders. So, like for anybody listening, in case this is helpful, as you're talking, I'm like, okay, I could see like using it these kind of ways. Like I have a journaling app which I don't really use as much as I should. It's called Day One. You could type in it and like you can create different journals in it. So I have like a family journal, and I actually have a journal in there for every kid. And I have 4 kids, and I would like
Oh, that's
upload
cool.
photos there, or sometimes I'll be talking to the our youngest, for example, who just turned 7, and we'll start having a conversation. It's just really precious. I start recording it without him knowing, and then I save it into that journal for his future, whenever he wants to hear it when he's an adult. um, and I
Wow.
actually used to do this where I set up a private email account for my kids, and I would email things to them, basically to their future self, to go, hey, like basically like words of wisdom, basically. Like
Yeah.
so like that was an idea that I had implemented. I think that could be cool, if you have kids especially, but you could even do that for yourself, where you email yourself and you just like send it to an email address that nobody else has or knows about. But when you were talking about that time travel, like note or whatever,
Yeah.
we use a
Yeah.
project management software called Asana, where you can write
Mm-hmm.
whatever and then have it like have a due date on a certain date. So you could have even like a note that's due a year from now, and then it will bring it to your list. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to like implement the ideas that you talked about, because a lot of times I think as people we tend to forget like what God's done in our lives, and it's easy to start doubting and be like, well, I don't know if he's going to really come through this time. And then if we can remind ourselves, and I've heard somebody say like, preach the gospel to yourself, so like reminding
Yeah.
yourself of God's
Yeah.
truth in whatever way that works for you. I think my one of my pet peeves is when somebody is like very adamant in like their way or the highway, like this is how you have to do it, otherwise you're foolish and like you're a loser.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that
Yeah.
like you share different ideas too.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe if you're just going to break it down to like a few practical things, I think there's just whether you're a person that loves to journal or like I have some friends who just don't enjoy it. it's like we do as human beings, all of us have a tendency. I think Tim Keller calls us gospel amnesiacs. You know,
Mm,
he uses that phrase, and his point is we have a tendency to be fearful. We have a tendency to forget, and
yeah.
so you know whether it's just putting simple things on your calendar, or you know maybe you're not a journaler, but you just write down a significant date, you
Mm,
know, in your phone, and it's like um, the unique thing is our physical bodies actually remember those things. Like if you've
mm,
ever had a significant moment, you know, like for us, something about the summer air right now in Texas reminds me, my body knows that this is the time we moved to Dallas last year because
mm,
it feels the cycle of
yeah,
that, you know. And so but I think to just help us remember God's faithfulness, and to relive those stories in ways, help us to be more faithful in the future for sure. And yeah, like you said, there's a thousand different ways you can do that.
yeah. So I think this is a great segue to your music. You just put out an album, and it's called
Yeah.
The Hope of Christ. It's a live recording. And when I listen to
Yep.
it, to me, like you're talking about, it's a reminder of, God's truth, and reminder of like why we're here, why we're created to worship. And there's so much
Yeah.
just great like truth nuggets in there. Like it's almost like you're teaching theology through songs. And I know like the worship
Yeah.
initiative,
Yeah.
like I think that's part of like the value that you guys have that I've
Hmm.
noticed is like really, theologically accurate, and there's a lot of depth to the songs. So what was your approach with the album? Like, did you have this vision for an album to have a certain theme, or was it just kind of like, let's write a bunch of songs and see what happens?
Yeah. This is a great question. And this is something I've been reflecting on. This is my first ever, I've been a part of other full length projects, but not all my own
Mm,
songs, you know, so I've been featured or like did a few church albums. And what was really unique, about doing a full project of songs I've written is I saw it like revealed themes to me about my own life and about my own writing that weren't clear until you put all the songs together, you know?
yeah.
And yeah, so some of the themes that started coming out were just like I tend to write songs that are pretty honest about the human experience, but I'm trying to do that also in a corporate way, you
Mm,
know? And then the backbone of the song is, you know, like to use the title, like the hope of Christ. It's like, you know, contrasting life's experiences with the steady and steadfastness of God.
mm,
And so I began to see that come out in a lot of the songs I was writing. And it actually, like, I started, you know, almost like we're talking about journaling. I started looking back and I'm like, oh man, that when I wrote that one, that was so true. And that's exactly what I needed to say to the Lord in that season. And then it's been helpful that I've done it in a way that's congregational.
mm,
So now other people can say the same
yeah.
thing to the Lord in their own season that's different than mine, but same truth. And so I do think songs, you know, they carry theology. It's not really a question if they do. The
Mm,
question is more like, is it good
yeah.
theology? Is it helpful
Yeah.
theology? And just that whole idea of like, you know, I don't know who coined this thought, but I've heard a lot of people say it of like, you oftentimes will leave church on Sunday and you know you'll remember things about the pastor's teaching, no doubt, but like um, songs have a way of like you might literally walk out singing a chorus
Mm,
and you can remember it. And I think that's the gift of music
yeah.
partnered with lyrics that are theologically true is they're memorable. They help us like carry theology around with us. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do in the record. It's a really congregationally accessible record. But yeah, I'm trying to pack I wanted it to be have depth
Mm,
in the sense of like it says meaningful things, you know?
yeah. Yeah. Well, as I listen to it, I'm like, man, there's so many songs on here that I want to introduce my to my church. uh, and I've
Oh,
always,
thank
yeah,
you.
I've always felt that about your
Yeah.
songs, even before the worship initiative. Like they are very singable and they are very like theologically rich. And I love that you're really focused on that. And as the worship initiative too, like there's a lot of stuff that you guys are putting out that is very, honest, but also like theologically very, just on point and a great reminder of God's word. Because I've
Yeah.
been in services, not at our current church, but churches I would visit where we would sing a song for like 7, 8 minutes, and I'm thinking about the words we're singing. I'm like, I don't even know if any of us understand what these words actually mean. like like there's no
Yeah.
depth to it, it's just kind of like a hype song almost, where it feels really emotional, and the band's doing a great job at like kind of creating that emotional experience in that moment. But
Yeah.
then theologically, I'm like, there's actually not really much of the biblical truth in here. And that's something that, causes me
Yeah.
concern, especially as I, like have 4 kids that are coming up, and like growing up in the church is
Totally.
like, we need to impart accurate theology, and not
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
just sometimes like a Western theology where it's very kind of like me centered theology.
Mhm.
Because we have enough of that in this
Yeah.
culture. So, yeah, I think that's something that,
Yeah,
yeah, I
no.
really pay attention to. So,
Those are great points, and, Shane Bernard, one half of Shane and Shane, the way he talks about that's been helpful for me as a writer is he makes the difference between, sometimes we can write things that aren't necessarily, like,
mm,
untrue, but they're not that helpful.
mm,
And, so oftentimes when we're writing, Shane will just ask me the question, like, or a lot of times he will be, a person that I'm just, like, bouncing certain ideas off of, and he will ask me, "Hey, what are you trying to say?" Just, like, outside of rhyming,
yeah,
and outside of, like, syllable count, "Tell me what you're trying to
mm,
say." And I'll just, like, tell him, and he'll say, "Okay, you're getting close to that, but what you're actually saying is not quite that yet."
uh,
And that's that whole idea of, like, there's a we can write things that are not
yeah,
heretical, but they also might not be as helpful as they could be if we just keep working at it and make it a little more clear.
yeah,
Um, and so that's been, I would say, that's been a growth area for me over the last number of years,
mm,
is just getting to a spot to keep whittling away at the lyric, especially, and keep rewriting and editing until it's saying what I'm actually trying to
yeah,
say, or at least it's closer to what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, that's just some practical thoughts. But I do want to say thank you for saying that, because, you never know how close you're getting. So hearing other people who are hearing your music and saying things like that, that's a huge encouragement to
yeah.
me.
And yeah, I think the songs, they feel more like hymn like or hymnish, and so it has that kind of like timeless element to it. But also, a lot of
Yeah.
hymns, I grew up singing hymns, and a lot of hymns have a lot of theology, but then a lot of them also, like, you don't really know what it means too. So I think,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah, you did a great job of like
Yeah, for
making
sure.
kind of like hymnish songs that are singable, playable by normal musicians and stuff too. So yeah,
Yeah. You know what's kind of funny about that, and I hesitate to even say this because, I don't know why I'm hesitating, but I really don't love hymns either, and not that I don't like them, but I came to faith a little bit later in
mm,
life, and so I don't. Maybe the best way to say is I don't really have this, like, nostalgic connection to hymns that some of my friends really do. And so at times, we're playing certain hymns in church, and I see people responding in a certain way, and
mm,
I'm like, I don't really feel that same thing about that song.
mm,
And so what's been interesting for me is I've not necessarily set out to be a hymn writer or a modern hymn
Mm,
writer. I've just tried to set out to write as best songs as I
yeah.
can and as theologically true songs as I can. And as I've done that, it's actually led me in that direction, which I think's really cool. And so, people have said, "Man, you're writing some of my favorite new hymns," and I'm like, "Hey, I wouldn't have even classified them that way." But the fact that you think there's some timeless, like that word timeless, I'm like, that's a huge compliment to me. And maybe that's just an encouragement to other songwriters who might be listening of like, you don't always have to pin yourself in a
Mm,
certain, category or whatever, because I wouldn't have put myself in a modern hymn writers category. But now
mm,
some of my songs definitely fall in
yeah.
that category, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. So just like let your art be truly who you are and be as best as you can, and then let some of that determine, where it goes
Yeah.
on its own, kind of.
Yeah. And something I saw on Twitter like several years ago uh, from this pretty well-known worship leader slash artist at the time, and he tweeted that if you personally aren't moved by the song that you're leading, then you shouldn't be leading that song. Like nobody else is gonna be moved by it. And I seldom like to debate on the social media because most of the time I'm like it's not very
Yeah.
productive. But I was like I feel like I have to say something, so I responded to it, and this is years ago, and I said, "Hey, I don't know that that's true because I was just at a senior center or retirement home, and I led
Hmm.
3 hymns, and I wasn't moved by them, but the people there were like literally in tears singing these hymns." So a lot of times, like as worship leaders, sometimes it's not about singing our favorite songs. It's about like serving and leading the congregation.
That's Yeah. Yeah. That word of that when you said serving, I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. I think we've got to remember that being servants is our number one
Mm,
calling. And, so if sometimes we lower our personal preferences pretty low on the totem pole and put the preferences of what serves that congregation, or in that instance, like that specific group of people, and then we serve them. And I think it's awesome when our personal preferences align
mm,
exactly with the group of people that we're serving. But yeah, there's lots of moments in worship leading where I've felt like, man, the most helpful thing I can do here is a little bit different than probably what I would want to do
yeah.
just on my own. And I'm appreciative of other people that lead that way, um, when I'm in the
Mm,
congregation, or pastors that are really, they could say it this way, but they're really putting it forth an effort to say it in a way that helps me connect. I mean, that's a beautiful
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, wow. Well, I feel like we covered a lot of stuff, and it's been a great conversation. And time has flown by. So,
Yeah,
I want to let people know
yeah,
that you are coming to the Worship Songwriters Retreat, which we're really excited about. And yeah, I was thrilled when you
same here,
said
man.
yes. So it's just about a month away now, September 12th through the 14th in Kansas
Wow.
City. So we
Yeah.
have folks coming from all over the country. So if you're listening and you're like, I don't live in Kansas City, it's actually open to anybody. So, and Aaron's coming from Dallas. So, um,
Yep. Yeah, come
yeah,
join
so we'll
us.
be covering some practical things with songwriting, and we're gonna actually do some like Q&A panels to answer questions from attendees about songwriting, and we're gonna actually have times for people to co-write in small groups, and then people like Aaron will be going around and giving pointers and encouragement here and there. So it's gonna be a really cool time. I don't think that at least I've not heard of anything like this in Kansas City or nearby areas. I started this kind of retreat back in the day, like 10 years ago in Nashville. And at that time, nobody was doing it in Nashville. And the reason we're not doing it in Nashville is because now everybody's doing it in Nashville. So I'm like, let's bring
Yeah.
this and put it somewhere else too, because other people can benefit from this.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
yeah. So if you,
Yeah, I can't wait to be with you
yeah,
guys.
we're really excited. If you are interested, there is an application process because it is limited to about 30 writers. And now I think we're about maybe there's like 7 or 8 spots left. So if you're interested, go to worshipsongwritersretreat.com and you can see all the information there. And there's a form that you can fill out to apply. And hopefully we get to meet you in person and you get to meet Aaron in person and shake his hand.
Yeah, can't wait.
So
Come
yeah,
join
Aaron,
us.
thanks so much for joining the podcast, and also for you guys listening. Be sure to check out the project. You can just search Aaron Williams or The Hope of Christ on your favorite platform. I would encourage you to listen to the whole thing because it is a really great project. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Wisdom. Appreciate all that you guys do. Look forward to seeing you in person
Yeah,
in a
me
month.
too.